Yeah, the technology is so fascinating to me. That was the reason. Like the startup kind of happened as somewhat of an accident. I mean, I always sort of realized it was a possibility going to Stanford, but I just fell so in love with the technology and the power of these devices, and um, how much they've changed the world.
This is Ren Smith. Sam Altman. Yes, the Sam Altman. 2009. He sits across from Charlie Rose for an interview about this app startup. It's called Looped. Altman was one of its co-founders. It was essentially kind of like this social media network built around location data. Rose presses him about how it might be misused.
You know that there's a lot of controversy about what Loop can do.
Yes.
Criticisms from a range of people.
With every new technology, there are, I think, some unique challenges, and certainly with location-aware services, the challenges around privacy. We build a tool and we do everything we can to stop that from being misused, but I can't sit here and say there's no way that it can be used for evil. We build in all the technology we can to prevent that from happening. I think as the public becomes more aware of these services, the chances for those misuse cases become lower.
Now, here in 2025, Altman is CEO of what's arguably become the most important technology company in the world, OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence innovations. And his stance hasn't changed much. Tech can self-correct if we just allow it to. Here he is at a recent federal Senate hearing responding to a question about regulation of AI.
I am nervous about standards being set too early. I'm totally fine, with the position some of my colleagues took that standards, once the industry figures out what they should be, it's fine for them to be adopted by a government body and sort of made more official. But I believe the industry is moving quickly towards figuring out the right protocols and standards here. And we need the space to innovate and to move quickly.
So I don't know if you just caught that, but Altman told the United States government not to regulate his industry until it tells them to, which is pretty gutsy and would seem to contradict the fundamental point of regulation. In North Carolina, coastal communities like Wilmington, that approach could end up raising rents. And that has to do with a little-known app made by a company called RealPage, marketed to landlords. It's alleged by the North Carolina Attorney General that it uses AI to suggest its customers raise rents, basically price fixing. Though it's hard to draw a line between the app and Wilmington's rising rents, the company has featured the city twice in blog posts. One of those posts talks about how in 2022, rent hikes in Wilmington trended above U.S. norms, while the other pointed out how in Wilmington, the number of renter households grew by over a quarter from 2020 to 2023, which marked the highest rate in the nation. In reaction, North Carolina lawmakers recently introduced a bill called Prevention of Algorithmic Rent Fixing, which would stop algorithms like the one made by RealPage from collecting information about how landlords are charging renters and for using that data to control the market. RealPage, by the way, which calls itself the leading global provider of AI-enabled software platforms to the real estate industry, filed a lawsuit against the city of Berkeley, Texas, for enacting as similarly restricting legislation. Shoresides reached out to RealPage for comment, but hasn't heard back. As that 10-year moratorium on state AI laws gained momentum, lawmakers were worried the Prevention of Algorithmic Rent Fixing bill wouldn't work out. So North Carolina Representative Zack, Hawkins, a Democrat, along with Republican Jake Johnson, co-signed a state policymakers coalition letter to oppose AI preemption, and that was sent to Congress as the budget bill rolled through last week. We reached out to both Johnson and Hawkins and got a chance to catch up with Hawkins over the phone about why he thought that letter was so important. This is Shoresides, where we tell stories about the North Carolina coast.
Zack Hawkins, Zack Hawkins. state representative, House District 31. That's Durham County, the great state of North Carolina. I'm serving in my fourth term in the North Carolina House of Representatives. I represent Research Triangle Park, parts of East Durham and parts of downtown. And I focus a lot on business growth, workforce development, emerging technologies, artificial intelligence.
At this point, Hawkins was on the edge of his seat as he watched the budget bill move forward.
What is happening actually now? The Senate just passed the bill with the Vice President as tiebreaker.
He felt the moratorium threatened to put a state like North Carolina at a distinct disadvantage. And that's not because he's a Luddite who's anti-AI, quite the opposite.
AI moratorium for states for a decade to not have the ability to chart its own path, differentiate itself from other states, make sure that they're protecting people in the ways that they see fit, just stunts the growth of a place like North Carolina that has started to attract more and more companies who are pushing forth factories in AI, state universities that had moved in that direction, companies that are adjacent to the AI space, empowered by AI, like they're coming to North Carolina, and we see it as a potential positive force for our people and our economy.
But to Hawkins, this was about exactly what Sam Altman had alluded to, tech being able to dictate government policy.
I think it was Inauguration Day. We saw quite a few tech billionaires. I think the tech companies have decided, and I think the federal government has had a chance to look across the scene in different states because there's lack of federation. They'll start to do their own thing. And I think that between federal lawmakers and those tech companies, they think it's the best way forward. I don't see it that way, but there's no two ways about how it's come about. The tech companies absolutely see this to their benefit.
At this point, though, the representative thought that we were beginning to see some light. The tide was turning, and there was a bipartisan effort to take a deeper look at the moratorium.
I think one person in particular, Marjorie Taylor Greene, which I rarely agree with, stated that she missed that part as she was reading the bill, but since she has seen it, has been a champion for deleting that AI moratorium because it does take away states' individual rights to govern emerging technologies.
Most legislators, he thought, had learned from the mistakes of the past, namely social media and the lack of regulation from its start. That's why, for instance, Representative Johnson had joined him in signing the letter.
Well, he in a move of bipartisanship. And I see this the same way, that we were both hopeful that someone would step in and realize that this is a complete overreach by the federal government. It's for the rights of states to govern, especially their economic opportunities, workforce development opportunities, business relations, and emerging technologies. We both saw that the exact same way.
The concern wasn't just that states might not be able to enact their own legislation and regulation, but that there might not be any at all.
So if states can't do anything for a decade, but the federal government decides not to do anything for a while, that means companies just continue to do as they please and in a uniform fashion across the United States. And we have little to no say. And, maybe it's a nothing burger. It sure doesn't feel like one.
Another thing Hawkins was concerned about was the general lack of clarity. Would the moratorium, for instance, limit a North Carolina bill that established artificial intelligence hubs at University of North Carolina?
Because it essentially says states can only do what the federal government gives them permission. Does that dip into policy, internal policy in state governments? Or is that just legislation from individual general assemblies, right? Again, things to be fleshed out.
Depending on a lot of factors like the political cycle, that fleshing out, he says, could take 3 or 4 years.
And I don't know, man. I just am really disappointed that that this kind of overreach was allowed.
In the end, North Carolina didn't have to wait 3 to 4 years for it to all get worked out. Not long after we spoke, 99 out of 100 senators voted to strip the AI moratorium from the budget bill. State legislators like Hawkins had won. While Shoresides reached out to Sam Altman and OpenAI to talk about that, our messages weren't returned. Another AI CEO, Dario Amodei of Anthropic, which provides Claude, a different AI system. In the New York Times op-ed, he wrote that without a clear plan for a federal response, a moratorium would give us the worst of both worlds. No ability for states to act and no national policy as a backstop. In other words, when algorithms say set rent prices, awareness isn't enough. You need rules. And for now, thanks to a bipartisan rebellion, let's call it, in Raleigh and DC, states will get to write those rules. This is Shoresides. I'm Ren Smith. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Representative Zack Hawkins. Learn more about Shoresides at shoresides.org.